Hello and welcome to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Nay and this is Nay's Crafty World. Here on my channel, I make videos about setting up my bullet journal for the year, and each month I upload videos setting up my monthly spreads. Today I'm setting up my second bullet journal for 2024 using the Tsuki Honeybee limited edition bullet journal from Notebook Therapy. At this very moment, this journal is sold out on their website. I'm not exactly sure if they're gonna be getting new stock in again, just because it's a limited edition. But nevertheless, I will link the bullet journal down below. For my bullet journals, I like to split them into 2 volumes for the year. I set up my volume 1 bullet journal for the first 6 months of 2024, and this volume 2 journal will contain the next 6 months. I usually like to keep my first pages pretty simple, but I did want to include a bee theme somehow, inspired by the notebook's cover art, of course. So I wanted to try to make my own bee-themed stencil for the first page. For the stencil, I glued 2 cardstock papers together to help make it sturdier. Now, if this is your first time watching one of my videos, I've started to include some junk journaling techniques in my bullet journal for this year. Really, it's a mixture of junk journaling and scrapbooking. Bullet journaling is a way to organize your tasks, thoughts, and feelings, but for me, and I know many of you, it's also a way to express your creativity. At the moment, I am making something called texture paste or texture paint. There are a few different ways to make this. Here I'm using some baking soda and mixing in paint. Most people use acrylic paint, but I only had gouache paint on hand, so I've used that instead. The baking soda is very coarse, so it gives the paint a slight texture and helps thicken the paint. It takes a little mixing before the paint starts to combine nicely, so just keep mixing until it forms a nice thick paste. Now that the paste is finished, let's get back to the journal. To make sure the stencil doesn't move around too much, I'm using some washi tape to keep it in place. Using the palette knife, I'm basically plastering the paint over the stencil. You can see that it goes on quite thick. It's helpful that the stencil is a little higher so that the paint will stand out more. Honestly, I was very nervous to do this for the first time. If it didn't work, it would have been a mess. While covering the stencil, I'm making sure to spread the paint in all directions to make sure that there aren't any air bubbles and get into all of the corners. Make sure to remove the stencil while the paint is still wet, otherwise the paint will chip off and won't have clean edges. I wasn't sure if all of the smaller stencil patterns would take, and even though they weren't as solid as I'd hoped, some of the paint did come through and the patterns are recognizable. I'm really happy about how this turned out, and I think I love it. For the name page, I'm simply writing my name on the dotted line with my Sakura pen. My mom gave me the stamp of my social media handle as a gift when I visited back home in South Africa at the beginning of this year. I really love using it in my journals. So thanks, Mom. For the first bullet page, I prefer to paste the whole page to the back of the name page, because I don't like how you have to fold it awkwardly to open the pages. And here is the final name page. I had to wait a while to let the paint dry properly, but it did dry a lot faster than I thought it would. Now let's start with my cover page. This will be a double spread, which means that I'll be using both pages for this cover page. The theme of this journal setup is, it's really a mixture of a few things. I wanted to use a lot of journal ephemera and journal papers on the cover page and throughout all of the spreads with a scrapbook style, as well as include some bee and beehive elements, with the color palette being very neutral with coffee colors, yellow, orange, and gold inspiring many of the pages. On the first page here, I'm using some journal papers and layering them on top of each other. Some of the journal papers are from Notebook Therapy's, I think it's called the Junk Journal box. I'll have to check it out, but I will link it down below. I am going to be making an unboxing video about that box very soon, so be sure to hit that subscribe button if you enjoy stationery hauls. As you can see, many of these papers have coffee stained designs on them, so that's really where the coffee elements in my spreads will come in. Here I'm using my alphabet stamp set to stamp out my volume 2 heading. When I say scrapbooking, I really mean layering different papers with different prints and textures on top of each other. And for the first time in my setup, I'm actually using some stickers. Really, there is no planning when setting up these kinds of spreads. I went through all of my ephemera and chose the papers that would go with the overall theme. I received this bee washi tape set from 𝒕𝒕𝒊𝒏𝒆𝒄. They have an online store where they sell washi tapes, stamps, and journal ephemera. I have a discount code with their shop, so if you follow my affiliate link in the description down below and use my discount code, you can get 20% off on your next washi tape purchase. The honeycomb washi tape and the bee washi tape are my favorite and was so useful throughout this setup. It really helps to have a range of stationery and ephemera. I usually go through all of my supplies to see what I actually have available before I pick my themes. Next, let's move on to the year page. This beautiful brown paper is from a store in Ho Chi Minh City. She makes the most beautiful handmade paper. I'll try and find her socials and tag her down below, but I'm not sure if they have any. So I'll take a look, see what I can do. When I start setting up the spreads, I kind of just let my creative side take over and start layering. It takes a minute to get into it, but once you get into the groove of things, everything tends to come together. That, however, does not mean I end up liking everything I do. Sometimes I'll put something down and later on I'll change my mind and try to do something different until I'm happy with it. After cutting out the year, I'm gluing it to a letter style paper and then cutting that page in half before gluing it to the year page. These are the stamps I mentioned earlier. They are these beautiful handwritten note stamps from 𝒕𝒕𝒊𝒏𝒆𝒄. For the ink, I'm using my Sakura brush pen in black. And lastly, I'm adding some more Notebook Therapy stickers around the page. This one looks like a ripped paper corner or a book corner. Unfortunately, all of them came with this white border. I'm sure some people prefer their stickers to have borders, but in general, I think they blend in better if they don't. These are the doily stickers and they are my favorite. Although I think they would show up a lot better with a darker background. And lastly, this letter sticker. Jumping straight into the next page setup. This is going to be my year at a glance page, which is basically a calendar page with the months that are included in this journal and is usually used to refer to when you're setting up your monthly spreads to check the days and the dates of the month. But to be honest, I haven't been using this page as much as I would like to. So I decided to change it up a little in this new journal and combine the calendar page with a theme tracker. What does that mean? Well, I'm going to set up my normal calendars as usual, but this time I'm leaving some space underneath each calendar where I will put something that represents the theme for each month. Depending on the theme, I might paint a picture or draw something, use a sticker, or even use some washi tape. I like to create my themes around the seasons, holidays, or sometimes something that I'm really interested in during that month or that time. I think this page will look really nice at the end of the year with all the themes. For the calendars, I've glued some dot grid paper to the craft paper cutouts. It's so much easier to use dot grid paper when setting up calendars. For the heading, I'm using my alphabet stamps. Although each page is slightly different, I try to keep everything quite uniform. So I'll be using my alphabet stamps for most of the headings in this setup. If you're like me and you really enjoy writing out calendars, let me know in the comments down below, because I tend to just zone out completely when I write these dates. It's almost, I don't know, it's almost kind of meditative. Meditative? That's a word. For the dates, I'm using my monthly stamps with this Ranger Distress ink pad in the color Gathered Twigs on brown craft paper and then cutting them out. I'm sure you've noticed by now that this is not a minimalistic, simple bullet journal setup. This setup took me a few days to complete. I worked on it in the mornings and afternoons in between my teaching schedule. I am lucky enough to be off most mornings, so I'm able to work on my journal then. I enjoy using my journals to express myself, but if you're someone that doesn't like to or doesn't have the time to take as many steps as I'm taking, don't worry, most of these spreads are still achievable by just putting pen to paper and making it your own, using your own style. I make these videos for my and your entertainment, as well as the hope of inspiring you to try something new. Next to the calendar page is the perfect spot for my important dates page. Usually I use this section as my future log, but I myself am trying out a bunch of new pages in this journal. I'll be including holidays and birthdays on this page under each month, as well as any important school events coming up. For this page, I've split the page in half and divided it into 3 sections so that I can fit all 6 months with enough space to write out all the dates and the descriptions. Now, this stencil is basically the main reason why I purchased the Notebook Therapy junk journal box in the first place. This is a coffee stain and splatter stencil, and I'm absolutely obsessed with it. I love how realistic it looks, but it's also small enough so that I can add a coffee mug stain without it taking up most of the page, like a real mug would. Again, not sponsored, but I do highly recommend. For the month heading, I'm using the same stamps as on the previous page. I like to sometimes have the ink go onto the back of the stamp so that it shows up when you press it down. Like if you press the stamp really hard, it'll show up. I like the little outline that it gives This is, after all, a handmade journal, and in my opinion, there is nothing better than a journal with imperfections, even ones done purposefully. At the bottom of the page, I'm using some washi tape and going in with one last coffee stain for the page before moving on. If you like to watch a lot of setup videos, you'll know that most of them are between, I don't know, like 20 to 25 minutes. This one, however, is much longer than I usually make my videos, and this next spread is the reason why. This is my future log, and usually I use maybe 1 to 2 pages for this spread, but in this journal I wanted to try something new. I came across Planning with Kay's channel, and in her journal setup she had a much longer, more detailed future log, and she inspired me to try it out. I printed out this honeycomb page on some normal printer paper, and again used my craft knife to cut out the pattern, leaving the black lines in between each hexagon, and using some gold glitter poster paint, I'm carefully going over the stencil. Some of them did smudge a little where the paint went through, but I'm not mad at it. I think it came out good. At the bottom, I'm adding a strip of honeycomb washi tape from IEB Office and cutting the excess washi tape off at the corner. Now for the future log, I'm making these larger calendars using dot grid paper. It's not a full page calendar because I want the honeycomb and washi tape to peek out behind the calendar once it's in. The calendar is big enough for me to write down holidays, birthdays, events. And yes, I do already have the important dates page, but I'm going to be using this future log to plan out my month in more detail. And I like that I'll have a better visual representation by using this calendar. I am putting the heading for this page here on the side of the page because for the rest of the future logs, I will be cutting Dutch doors. So you'll be able to see the heading no matter what month you're on. If you're not familiar with Dutch doors, they are when you cut the pages in the journal itself to be smaller than the rest of the pages. So they're kind of like little doors in your journal. I'm also including some tabs for each month to make it easier to find the month you're looking for. Continuing with July's future log on the right page. This is where the majority of the planning will happen. This is where I will plan out the entire month. And I'm keeping it very simple because each month will most likely look very different. I could use this page to make a to-do list, write down my video plan for the month, write down my class schedule, etc. Honestly, thinking about it, this is basically a brain dump page. In my old journal, I did do something similar in my monthly plan pages, but I think having them at the front of the journal as well as having them all together makes much more sense. And when I look back at the year, I'll be able to see everything in one section. For the what I now want to call my brain dump page, I'm adding some more honeycomb with my stencil, but this time I'm using the ink pad instead of the paint. On the tab, I'm using this black B washi tape to cover the front and the back of the tab and cutting off the edges. And lastly, I'm rounding out the corners with my corner cutter. All of the future log pages will have the exact same layout, but with different papers and themes on each page. The colors will all be within a neutral palette so that they still go together. And now, to give you a little break from me talking, here's a nice time lapse of me setting up the rest of my future log pages. And here we are at the last future log page for December. For this page, I kept it very simple with some craft paper corners on the calendar and the header. I've seen these little paper corners at almost every craft store, and they are so nice and easy to use in your journals. With all the tabs covered in their own washi tape, I think that these future log pages look beautiful, even if I have to say so myself. For the next spread after the future log pages, I'm going to be setting up my media tracker pages, also a double spread. I've seen a few people track their hobbies and the media that they consume, any entertainment really, like books, movies, series, music, podcasts, etc. And so far, I hadn't really done a page like this in my bullet journal, but after thinking about it, I think this kind of spread will be interesting to look to look back at in a few years when I page through my old journal and I can look at all of the things that I watched or listened to, read, played, because I play a lot of games as well. So this really is more something for future Nate to look back on. These bullet journals really are our memories at this point. You get to look back on not only all the pages you've made yourself, but also reminisce on what you did and how you felt. Even though I really only started making bullet journal content last year, I, like many others, started doing this back in 2020 during the pandemic. And even now, looking back at how I use my journal to help me cope makes me happy that I have those memories in a journal. I really wanted to go full on scrapbook on these pages, filling them completely with journal pages, washi tape, stickers, and add some stencil details, the works. Because I have the future log Dutch doors on the left, I know that a section of the right page will be visible when you're going through the future log. So I'm matching up this part of the page to the first future log page by adding some honeycomb washi tape and using my honeycomb stencil with the distress ink. Now that the decorations are finished, I'm using some white dot grid paper for the actual media trackers. Each section is a little different from the rest, so it kind of looks like one of those dark academia walls with all the different size frames and paintings. Here I'm adding some more of those written note stamps around the page, as well as some more stickers around the trackers. Really, I'm just trying to fill in the page as much as possible. I like how busy the background looks, but with the contrasting trackers on top. For the heading, I'm again using my alphabet stamps. In the end, I have 6 different things that I'll be tracking for the rest of 2024. Finally, we've reached the last pages of my bullet journal setup for 2024. The next spread is my period tracker. I wanted this page to be much simpler than the previous pages, but still have the same scrapbook feel. So I'm using this gorgeous paper that is also from the Notebook Therapy Junk journal box. Here I'm using dot grid paper for the calendars as well as the title. If you don't know what a period calendar is, it's very simple, really. This is just where I'm going to mark the days that I'm on my period. In my last journal, I used one with a little more detail, but I ended up not filling it in half of the time with the different symptoms, as I didn't do it as much as I thought that I would. So for this tracker, I'm going back to the basics. I love how colorful the flower and the leaves are in this paper. And yes, I am covering up a portion of the flower with the September calendar, but I like how you can see the flower petals peeking out from the behind the calendar. To add some more dimension, I'm using my distress ink to darken the edges of the calendars. This will make them stand out more. And now let's finish up this setup with my weather tracker. In my March setup this year, I tracked the weather each day on my weekly pages, and I really enjoyed the look of it. So for my volume 2 bullet journal, I wanted to try a weather tracker. Using dot grid paper, I made the weather tracker itself and the key I'm going to be using to fill in the tracker. After cutting them out, I'm using the same distress method as before, and I'm adding some distress ink on the edges of the paper. If you're still here, please leave me a little bee emoji in the comments down below and let me know what you think of my setup. I've recently started getting more comments on my videos, and it makes my heart so happy to hear all of your feedback. I've been so lucky in this little community of ours to be able to share my bullet journal with lovely people like yourself. So thank you so much for all of your support. And if you are new here, welcome, and thank you for joining our crafty world. Here I'm using my brown Sakura brush pen to draw the lines in my tracker. I'll probably use similar neutral colors to fill in the key and then later on each day, but I haven't decided which colors yet. What colors do you relate to different types of weather? For me, I think yellow would be a sunny day. Rainy, I would go with, I think, a muddy green color. Cloudy would be gray in my mind. Thunderstorm, maybe black. And flood, because I live in Vietnam and we do tend to get quite a few floods during rainy season, at least at the start of rainy season. So for floods, I think I would probably use a dark blue. Welcome to those of you that skipped straight to the flip through section of this video. I hope that you find some inspiration in my volume 2 bullet journal for 2024. If you want some more inspiration, you should go check out my volume 1 bullet journal as well.